The year is the 2020s in Seoul, South Korea. Today was just supposed to be another day, with every person lost in their own world, mindlessly going from point A to point B. An ordinary day that was no different from any other day before. People were naive and held the notion that the peace they thought they had would last forever. But even the remote idea of peace would be put to the test one fateful day. The day normalcy was shattered came with the appearance of what people now call dungeons. The most apparent and terrifying rift in space appeared in the middle of a crowded city, right where the population and foot traffic were at their peak. At that point in time, no human had any idea of what they were seeing, what was about to happen, or how different their lives would be from that moment on. It just came out of nowhere, a historically altering event that changed the course of humanity's trajectory. What came out of the dimensional rifts were monsters beyond human comprehension, muscular bodies, demonic horns, and eyes exploding with aggression. A countless number of monsters poured out of that dungeon. They did not waste a single second and immediately went after the people on the streets. For some ungodly reason, that was the day forces from out of this world cornered humanity in fear. In a state of frenzy and panic, the situation quickly devolved into one where every man or woman was thinking only for themselves. Without the help of fellow humans, anyone would just be a sitting duck against this new fearsome force that tore the fabric of space, right in the middle of a random street, on a random day. An orc-like muscular monster raised its battle axe with vitriol aiming for a poor woman who had just tripped and fallen. But it's not like everything was bleak and hopeless at this bizarre point in time. With the despair of the unknown horrors also came hope. From within the chaos, the merciless monster was swallowed by a bright light, as a clean swing from a magical sword took the beast down. A heroic figure stood tall. They are humanity's hope in this world, where every second of life is under threat from unknown forces. These entities are called hunters. They provide aid through the subjugation of any foreign enemies that dare to encroach on humanity's space. Boasting different abilities and masteries, they are the world's first and final line of defense. To these hunters, killing monsters is not just altruism or charity. There are resources that appear when a creature from a dimensional rift is killed. So instead of threatening humanity's very existence, the emergence of other worlds has ironically helped humanity prosper. Equipped with power that defies common sense and the physical limitations of the old world, the world of the hunters began. As for our story's protagonist, well, he's not exactly in a good spot today. He has to run an errand to the Hunter Association registration office, where just like any other bureaucratic office, you have to get a number and wait until it's called. The woman at the other side of the desk was looking at the details in his paperwork, and she could not believe that someone like this man could exist. He possesses the rare labor class. His name is Yuji, and you'd better remember that. The office worker continued to inquire about any skills or traits that the man might have gotten through awakening. He just smiled as if the question had been asked about him 1,000 times before. Yuji gave a wry smile and an awkward little laugh as he admitted that he did not possess any skills or traits at all. At the heart of the city, a sprawling metropolis of massive conglomerates and organizations within a quaint corner of this urban jungle, was a small business with a potion bottle for a logo. It was the Seoul Sector 7 Hunter store. A young lady and what looked to be her father entered the store to see and possibly buy some of the wares. Yuji owns and manages this small hunter store business by himself. The dad was just looking to get some potions, but the young lady smiled and pointed right at the owner. She walked up to Yuji and asked, rather casually, if he really was that man who had the rare labor class. He'd been asked this question many times, but it never got any easier or less awkward to answer. The labor class is rare, but not for good reasons. The young lady asked if it was really true that Yuji doesn't have any skills, essentially making it impossible for him to hunt. Her father quickly gathered the potions they needed and apologized for the young lady's straightforward words. Without missing a beat, Yuji assured the man that it was okay. He had gotten quite used to this type of thing by now. Besides, the young lady hadn't said anything wrong. As he scanned the potions on the counter, Yuji admitted that he truly did lack any special skills. Unlike most people, he didn't even hunt, he just gathered resources from time to time. The young lady was still fascinated by the fact that such a man existed in this world. Her father lectured her to stop asking such awkward questions and wasting time, but she insisted there was nothing wrong with being curious, especially in such a bizarre case. Just out front on the service road, the full swing of the city's armed forces and law enforcement squads were being deployed to an area in need of urgent assistance. Watching this sight from the storefront window, the young lady guessed it must be a rank 3 dungeon that had just opened nearby, especially if the defense forces were bringing in the panzers. There were also ambulances among them. It was best to avoid wherever these units were going. That already went without saying, as neither she nor her father had anywhere near enough skill to entertain the thought of going to such a high-level zone. Yuji watched as the customers bickered, their argument continuing even while watching the endless flow of forces heading toward the rank 3 dungeon. A few moments later, he respectfully sent them off. The two were still bickering non-stop. Yuji knew that there would be a lot of resources in a place like a rank 3 dungeon, abundant treasures he would probably never get his hands on. It was impossible for the armed forces to even consider contacting him for such work. It had been 5 years since he was awakened out of nowhere on that special day. He had received a unique class called Laborer, but it was hardly anything to be happy about. Looking at his Grand Hunter profile, it was evident he didn't receive any skills or traits. He couldn't even dream of going inside a dungeon with other hunters to kill monsters. His stats were the very definition of normal. Yuji had already come to terms with that. But instead of feeling sorry for himself, he decided to support hunts from the rear. After a company or guild cleared a dungeon, Yuji would sneak in and pick up whatever leftovers he could find, selling them for a modest profit. No one really recognized the work he put into that gig. Between that and running his hunter store to peddle his wares, he made a decent enough living enough to support his true passion, reading old books. Any old book he could get his hands on he'd read. For Yuji, nothing beat cracking open an ancient account of the past, no matter what it was about. The little store didn't get too busy in the middle of the day, giving him plenty of time to peacefully read. Today had been running long though, so long that he was starting to yawn and feel sleepy. The difficulty of the book he had chosen might also be playing a part. Though an enthusiast, the thick green book was giving him a hard time. His eyes glossed over the pages until he could no longer bear the weight of his eyelids. It was nap time for Mr. Labor class. He finally passed out on top of the book he had been trying to decipher. The open page he stopped at featured a massive illustration of what looked like a magical tree. Collecting and reading old books is quite the chore for some, but there's always a non-zero chance it could lead to something extraordinary. The page Yuji had paused on began to emit an energy full of vitality. That illustrious energy started to converge on the realistic illustration. Yuji was in his study at the hunter store, peacefully taking a midday nap 1 second, and then the next he was transported to a mysterious plane as a piece of leaf hit his forehead. When he finally regained consciousness, panic and countless questions immediately flooded his mind. He was now sitting in the middle of a mysterious jungle. After composing himself at least a little, he started racking his brain to figure out where he was. There didn't seem to be any apparent landmark to observe. The whole forest was covered in thick foliage and an encroaching fog. He tried pinching himself as hard as he could. The pain proved this was definitely not a dream. Another possibility was that he was under an illusion. So he decided to at least check his status window. Everything looked pretty much normal, nothing special, just a unique class and a whole bunch of numbers that screamed mediocrity. Now that he had calmed down for a minute, he noticed another eerie trait of the forest. For a place so large and rich in vegetation, it was dreadfully silent. Yuji couldn't hear any animal sounds. His limited vision due to the thick fog didn't help either. But what he could see now were some twigs with a strange fruit that looked like it had been hit by a storm. With his rich experience in handling ingredients for his shop, Yuji had never seen any fruit quite like it. The system listed it as a level 1 EA herb. It makes the EA consumption of all skills 0 for 10 seconds when consumed. Yuji had never heard of a plant called EA herb before, but he could not believe its description. That effect was just too absurd. No matter how you spin it, 0 EA consumption for 10 seconds was an incredible advantage. To put it into context, in this world awakened hunters need EA, or ether, to use any skill. It's like fuel that powers their abilities. The stronger the skill, the more EA it consumes. That's what made this mysterious herb so amazing. It basically gave you 10 seconds of unrestrained combat. If Yuji could take even just a little liquid from this herb, he'd be able to study its effects. Unfortunately, he didn't bring a bottle with him on this impromptu adventure to an unfamiliar place. While thinking about that wasted opportunity, he noticed something else. Not far from where the herbs were, there were leaves still clinging to a tree that looked like it had been wrecked by something unknown. It was an unnatural sight. Those leaves might die if left as they were. Even in this unfamiliar land, Yuji decided to do the kind thing and help the leaves survive. He carefully transferred the fledgling plant to a new location where it could start establishing stronger roots, and even gave it a kickstart with splashes of water. Luckily, there was water nearby that he could use to increase the chances of keeping the plant alive. Yuji's hands were full of dirt, and even moving the tiny plant had tired him out. But the smile on his face was genuine. Out of nowhere, the system notified him, "You have gained plant immobility level 1. After obtaining the plant-friendly level 1 skill, another notification followed. "You have gained the blessing of XXX. Level 1 trait, blessing of XXX. These notices came out of nowhere and shocked Yuji to the bone. After years of being nothing in the awakening department, he suddenly gained a skill and a trait in one go, all from simply planting a twig back into the ground. Little did he know the tiny twig he helped had already started taking root below the surface at an unprecedented rate. It is safe to say this is not your run-of-the-mill twig. The plant was digging deeper into the earth, absorbing the lush and bright energy contained below. Yuji watched as the old tree from which he had cut the twig began to dematerialize into thin air. Meanwhile, the smaller piece developed into something special in just a matter of seconds. He would have called what was happening in front of him impossible, yet to see is to believe. Yuji was frozen, staring at the incredible and magical sight, until he was suddenly transported back to his office. The trees around him were replaced by the rich collection of old books on his shelves. He was back where he was supposed to be without even having had time to fully process what happened in those mysterious foggy woods. He figured it might have just been a hyper-realistic dream. He was about to wipe the sleep from his eyes, but something didn't feel right. He felt a rough and cold sensation. There was dirt on his hands and clothes. This only further supported the idea that what he experienced was not a dream after all. There was something about the ancient book he had been researching, something truly special. To think that his hands would be covered in dirt while he was just sleeping soundly in his office was an absurd thought. Of course, there was also the possibility that he might be unknowingly suffering from sleepwalking, but he was certain the door was locked, and there was no place with dirt anywhere around where he sat. Going by the logic of his first trip to the mysterious forest, he might just be able to return if he falls asleep again. When you have an idea and want to see if it works, there's only one thing to do: test it. At the first chance he got, Yuji did just that. And by the looks of the converging energy in the middle of the woods, it was a success. As expected, he was transported to the exact same place as before. It might take a little while to get used to, but at least he had now established that the place was real. It was the same place, but with some subtle changes. Right now, it looked a bit wider than before. The fog seemed to be clearing up a little as well. Based on what he had seen and experienced, this might be a special dungeon he could enter in his sleep. He had never heard or read anything about such a place. As he was trying to take in as much information as he could from his surroundings, he noticed something strange about the barren trees surrounding the twig he had tried to revive. Now juicy golden fruit had sprouted from them. It was a level 1 solar apple. Its effect stated that, when combined with a health potion, the healing amount increases by 20%, though its duration decreases to 80%. Unlike the EA herb, Yuji had heard of these so-called solar apples. He knew how rare they were even in high-ranking dungeons. The 20% boost in healing they provided was far too good to ignore. As the owner of a small hunting shop, he also knew that health potions were the most commonly used items in dungeons. However, over-the-counter healing potions available to the public only healed a maximum of 10% of one's total health, and in small quantities, With the solar apple's effect on top of that, not only would the healing be significantly stronger, but the recovery process would also be much faster. And it wasn't just one or two solar apples either. As far as the eye could see, the once barren trees were now teeming with ripe solar apples, waiting to be harvested. Yuji's mind raced. If he could take the solar apples and herbs out of this place, he might be able to create potions with incredible effects. It still felt weird to think about it, but he tried to convince himself that it would be fine to take one or two just to study them. As he thought about how to carry them, suddenly a sack pouch fell from the sky, hitting him square in the face. But this wasn't just any ordinary pouch. It was a valuable dimensional pouch, an item that could store materials in a limited independent space. As he examined it, wondering if he could store items inside, he realized there were already a few bottles stored inside. He had just been thinking of how to carry the items from this place, only for the sky to provide him with a solution. Yuji could only laugh awkwardly at the eerie thought of something listening to him from above. Regardless, he had gotten everything he needed. It was time to test if he could harvest the treasures from this place and bring them back. The very next day, let's shift our focus to the famous hunter specialty chain store in District 7 of Seoul, known as the Hunting Ground. Inside, customers had already lined up early to buy hunting supplies. The store was so popular that buyers were pushing and shoving to get to the front of the line. A hunter wearing heavy armor at the front was furious when he was notified that there were no more paralysis resistance potions left. The store attendants tearfully apologized for the inconvenience, explaining that they were out of stock and that it would take an hour for a refill. For busy, high-profile hunters, this kind of delay was unacceptable. Some had already ordered their assistants to contact other businesses, as the time frame for entering dungeons is limited. But every major hunting supply business was also in the middle of a massive shortage. While everyone was whining and complaining about being late for their hunts, someone entered the room and all eyes turned to that person. Dark hair, beautiful face, top-tier armor, sharp disposition, a fearsome blade. She is Ku Hien, also known as the Sword Witch. She skipped the long line of complaining customers and directly asked the attendant to please call the manager. No one dared to complain that she didn't line up. For some of them, this was their first time seeing a hunter of such caliber as Ku Hien in person. She was dressed in rare class artifacts, no lower than items looted from Tier 4 dungeons. The Sword Witch is ranked 12th in the current hunter rankings, so it's understandable why she's decked out in top-notch gear. The manager finally showed up to personally welcome the Sword Witch, stuttering, having no idea that such a renowned figure in the hunting world would come to the store in person. But she had been forced to come. The store had been dodging her calls about the potions she ordered in advance. The manager apologized, explaining they had a lot of prior bookings and that the potions Ku Hien needed were still unavailable. However, someone of her stature could not afford to waste time waiting for potions. She was under a tight schedule. In 30 minutes, she would be entering a dungeon. The Sword Witch ignored the incompetent manager and pulled out her phone to check for nearby hunter shops. Even general stores would do. In a small Sector 7 hunter store, Yuji had successfully harvested ingredients from the mysterious forest and was now conducting experiments. He used purified water, undi tears and herb liquid, a pretty compact list. With the main potion brewed just the right way, he added the solar apple concentrate and mixed it carefully to complete the experiment. As he waited and observed the result, the system sent him another notification. Due to XXX blessing, a great success verdict has been applied to the concoction. He had also unlocked the first level of the sought-after skill, alchemy. The final product was a level 1 special potion. Upon use, all skill F consumption becomes 0 for the next 14 seconds. Restores 14% of maximum health over the span of 15 seconds. Yuji had expected the effects to be good, but not this good. Even self-proclaimed alchemists didn't have the alchemy skill. Unlocking it in just one experimental run was shocking. As he swirled the solution around, observing how unbelievably pure it was, he couldn't help but wonder what in the world is the blessing of XXX that gave him such results. But before pondering that further, he had to ask himself, should he sell this potion? He knew the potion had outstanding effects, but pricing it would be tricky. On top of that, it could be a hard sell, since the description sounded too good to be true. People might not believe him if he casually listed off the effects, so he steeled his resolve to not sell it yet, and to try it out on himself first. At that exact same moment, the sword witch entered his humble little store. Yuji wore his usual customer service smile and politely asked the elegantly armored woman how he could be of service while his experimental special potion sat on the counter. She moved like lightning, going from the entrance to the counter in a split second, desperately asking for potions because she was running out of time. The sword witch finally noticed the fizzy concoction sitting on the counter, almost as if it was begging to be taken. Kuhian asked if the contents of the bottle were a health potion, and Yuji confirmed that it was. But before he could explain further, the sword witch cut him off. When she asked what its effects were, Yuji tried to insist that the potion was still not for sale, but she had no time to hear him out. She simply apologized, saying she couldn't afford to talk any longer. If it's a health potion and there's nothing wrong with it, I'll just take it. The sword witch threw a pile of cash onto the counter and told Yuji to contact her guild in case the compensation wasn't enough. Then she left as fast as she arrived, disappearing in an instant with the speed of a top-ranked hunter. Yuji was still worried about how this situation would turn out. But the sword witch should be fine, right? Let's see if that's the case. Let's follow the sword witch in her dungeon excursion. It looked like today would be an easy run. She hadn't even drawn her blade. Instead, she cast a spell that summoned energy swords, instantly one-shotting monsters that dared to cross her path. She dispatched powerful creatures like they were minor inconveniences, clearly aiming for something deeper inside. Her other party members were only there as designated looters, gathering materials from fallen monsters she hadn't bothered to carve. As expected from the 12th ranked hunter, the others had it easy, but still felt a little scummy. It was like being carried through the dungeon without a chance to hone their own skills. The older looter had long since given up trying to grow stronger so as not to burden the sword witch. He had accepted his role, quietly gathering resources while she wreaked havoc. He had been with Ku Haiyan for a while now, and he remembered the old her a time when she would let less talented members join the fights. But after one particular incident, she changed, becoming a complete solo play hunter. Newbies didn't know about that incident. It had been a while. As the older looter was about to explain, they suddenly heard the sword witch's panicked voice shout, "Run!" At first they didn't even see the reason behind the urgency became clear, and when they saw it they looked frozen in fear. Standing up front, emanating a domineering aura, was a manstalker, an aversion-level monster the size of an armored car. It was not only physically imposing, it also used extreme poison as a weapon. An aversion-level monster that only appears in grade 4 or higher dungeons shouldn't be in this place at all. Failure to escape would only mean certain death. The sword witch immediately rushed in with her blade spell, once again insisting that the two should run as far and fast as humanly possible. Her speed was no joke. Every step propelled her deeper into the monster's strike zone, but she was charging in with all of her magical blades primed and ready to stab the manstalker all at once. She finally pulled out her ultimate weapon, a massive greatsword shining with blue light. The full-powered slash, however, was easily blocked. The manstalker's nasty, naked hand-like pincers turned out to be tougher than expected. They could actually contend with her greatsword. With the body of a human demon-scorpion hybrid, it excelled in both speed and strength, making Manstalker a fitting name. In hopes of wounding the sword witch, the monster mowed down a decent chunk of the dungeon's forest. Even Sacrian had to admit that this creature might be too damn strong for her. Just dodging those sharp attacks had worn her out considerably. Her ethyl was almost completely consumed. The only thing she could think of now was that she only had enough left to buy time for the others to escape. At times like this she always gets reminded of that incident, the one that changed her. If Suark were here, things would be going a lot differently, but she must push on. She knows that Suark is not around anymore, things have changed, and she must now rely on herself. She took the potion she had hurriedly bought from a tiny general store in the city and popped the cork. Looking at its contents, she was determined to believe in only herself from now on, and while she's at it, she might as well believe in this odd potion too. Since it came from a general store, she already braced herself for the foulest taste imaginable. But to her surprise, the potion didn't taste or feel awful. She emptied the entire flask in one sip without even noticing. It was a potion, all right, but oddly it was as delicious as a fine beverage. Another thing that shocked her was how consuming the concoction made her feel as if she were overflowing with infinite ether. With her combat experience, she immediately knew this boost was massive. So massive that she wouldn't just have to buy time, it was massive enough to turn the tables on the manstalker. She was going for round 2. Rather than retreating, she took the initiative to advance. The monster took her on, as if confident it had already won. But this time, things were different. The sword witch executed her ace in the hole, a technique known as powerful sword rampage. In a split second, countless fine slashes with flawless precision rained down on the hideous monster without mercy. It was the ultimate technique in terms of power and speed. The manstalker's face got diced and its meat slid apart, falling off in bloody chunks. She had beaten an unbeatable foe in its own game of speed and strength. Standing at the other side of the destruction she had just caused, she could hardly believe that she did all that. Ku Hien knew it was all thanks to that potion. On top of restoring health, her ether consumption was essentially zero. Thanks to that, she was able to use powerful sword rampage for 10 seconds, even though her maximum limit was supposed to be just 3 seconds. If all of this was due to the potion she had just hurriedly picked up from a random shop, then this could be big. The biggest question in her mind now was, what in the world is that little shop? What the hell is that kind and always smiling owner hiding? The next day arrived and it was pretty much business as usual in the little Sector 7 Hunter store. That was, until the customer bell on the door chimed its welcoming sound. Everyone in the store, including the owner Yuji, had their attention stolen by the person who entered. The sword witch didn't mince words. And it was as if the other customers didn't even exist in her vision. She made a beeline directly to the owner. She grabbed him by the shoulder, almost as if afraid that he might run away, and asked, "What the hell was that potion you sold me?" Ku Hien is a superstar. Virtually every hunter in the country, let alone the city, knows who she is. Also, the news of her slaying a manstalker had already been so exaggerated that some accounts said she devastated a whole swarm. Now that she noticed other people were nearby, she tried to compose herself and apologize to Yuji for being rude. She insisted that there was a problem with the potion. The problem was that she had never seen a potion that could heal 14% of max health and eliminate ether costs for skills entirely. Even Yuji himself had already seen the uploaded clip, the one of her eliminating an aversion-ranked monster on her own using an amazing series of powerful moves. She kept clarifying that she wasn't the impressive one in that clip, it was the special potion. She just wanted to know where Yuji got it, or if he brewed it himself. He was quite prepared to answer any questions regarding his special brew by simply showing her the secret ingredient, the ripe, golden solar apple. The story he decided to go with was that he stumbled upon the solar apple in a Tier 1 dungeon. That detail, however, was too hard to believe. Even the sword witch herself had to pause and seriously consider whether solar apples were really common enough to spawn in the least dangerous dungeon. Yuji thought that revealing the details about the forest could go very wrong, very quickly. So for now he would just make some excuses. Still, as the one who made it, he was genuinely happy that his potion helped the sword witch. She noticed something as she looked around the limited space of the shop. She spotted another batch of interesting potions. The contents were blue this time. She took one to inspect up close and asked him what the effects were. He casually explained that it gives 32% ice resistance that lasts for 40 minutes. Hearing that description almost took Ku Hien out. She's a combat veteran, and she was certain that the best quality ice resistance potion in the market only gives 10% resistance and lasts 15 minutes max. This potion was miles better in every way possible. When asked where he found it, Yua started searching for another excuse in his mind. In reality, he had just harvested another type of plant growing in the mysterious forest. Level 1 winter strawberries can already provide 20% ice resistance for 30 minutes on their own. He took just enough of them to brew a batch of experimental ice resistance potions. Yuji enjoys the process of brewing these potions. With his alchemy skill in full display, he whipped up a whole batch, which caused his alchemical skill to jump to the second level. But when faced with questions about his methods, his go-to excuse was that he found the ingredients in a Tier 0 dungeon. The Sword Witch could see that this guy was just a bad liar. Seeing that he wanted to keep his business a secret, she didn't pry any further, noticing how uncomfortable the owner was. However, she would like to buy all of these new ice resistance potions. She would even pay in cash. For a high-ranking hunter, pulling out a wad of paper money was no big deal. She didn't even need a receipt. Yuji tried to say that the amount was way too much for just a few potions, but if you ask her, she knew that her cash wasn't even nearly enough for potions of this quality. Before going through the door, she finally asked him what his name was. He gave it with no fuss. Yua. She liked it. Yua had a nice ring to her ears. Before actually leaving the premises, the Sword Witch playfully told him that they'd see each other again next time. Back inside the mysterious forest, the place itself was starting to look better and better. He had been regularly harvesting glowstones, kindle gems, and his winter strawberry basket was in need of a refill after the Sword Witch's bulk buying. But he could just walk up and get some more. The glowstones and kindle gems were new finds for Yua. There were just so many precious resources in this forest. Without the threat of any dangerous monsters, he was reaping the benefits. Yet even now he still had no clue about what or where this place was. He had gotten so used to the tranquil silence of the greenery that even a tiny sound of movement behind the foliage caught his attention. Yua was put on high alert. He was certain that he didn't hear that sound wrong. There was something lurking behind the bushes. Upon looking all over the place, he saw the source. Shock and curiosity were the chief emotions he felt at that moment. He had just happened upon a cute beetle-like creature, with pincers in place of limbs. The system identified it as a Turtura drone, a mythic monster as big as a small car. It resembled a beetle, but sported its signature giant claws. He knew of the creature known as Padrone. Mythic creatures are few and far between, after all. Right now he wasn't just seeing one, he was actually seeing several of them walking around. Contrary to their described size of being as big as a small car, these guys were tiny. Another bizarre thing was a transparent synthetic wall that he couldn't pass through in this part of the land. The Turtura drones were grouping up and hastily heading for something. That something was a group of devil ants, hazard-ranked, cargo truck-sized monsters. Killing one attracts 10 more, making them supremely difficult to deal with. The Turtura drones were actually going up against some powerful foe for some unknown reason. Ya could only watch from behind the synthetic barrier, recalling what he had read about devil ants in one of his old books. They are true blue hazard-ranked monsters, but the poison they emit makes them even more dangerous than some aversion-ranked monsters. Throughout this whole ordeal, one glaring issue stood out. The system prompts kept telling him that these creatures were all supposed to be gigantic. But looking at them now, they just looked like tiny bugs engaging in increasingly intense combat. The Turtura drones were on the back foot. They were being absolutely demolished by the devil ants. These adorable Turtura drones were trying to pick a fight, and losing. Most of them weren't even really fighters. Yua could only wonder what was making them do this. Seeing that the charming creatures were about to get steamrolled, he wanted to find a way to help them. As if the heavens heard his worries, a system prompt appeared asking him if he wanted to help his own Turtura drone legion in this war. That alone implied that he could directly intervene in something he didn't even fully understand. The prompt also said that these were his Turtura drones, implying that the mythical creatures were under him. It's in Yuji's nature to feel inclined to press the yes button to help the Terra drones in their struggle. His legion was losing hard right now, but he could use his essence to cast an area buff. There were 4 choices. Increase HP by 30% for 1 hour. Increase poison resistance by 40% for 1 hour. Increase physical resistance by 30% for 1 hour. Each of these costs 1 essence. The last choice costs 2 essence, and it simply grants the laborer's blessing. Helping them directly would be impossible with the synthetic barrier in place. A shield was on the way, but giving assistance through these options was the next best thing. He currently had 2 essences on him. The fourth option was the most expensive out of all the choices, so Yua wanted to choose that one. As soon as he confirmed the bestowment of the laborer's blessing, it was as if every stat the Tertura drones possessed was bolstered by divine intervention. They gained a much-needed physical augmentation and a valuable morale boost. It didn't take long before the devil ants were absolutely smoked. The Tertura drones quickly turned the tables. They didn't just turn the tables, they smashed them right over the ants' faces. These beetle boys actually minced the devils up so hard that they lost their creepy crawlers. Yua celebrated on the sidelines, proud of his soul legion for winning the war. He couldn't believe that he had just seen some mythical creatures prevail over adversity. With his help, he personally thanked the Tertura drones for standing up for their principles and protecting the forest. As he was praising them for their good work, Yua noticed that these little dudes were gathering something. They were offering up a whole lot of essence and east stones. He smiled at the Tertura drone legion's generosity and thanked them for thinking of him. Unfortunately, the Tertura drones didn't seem to understand what he was trying to say. In the end, he simply took 5 essences and 5 essence stones each. He wanted to leave the rest of the precious resources to the little guys who had actually fought with their lives on the line. This much was already good enough for him. At that moment, the transparent synthetic barrier slowly dissolved into nothing. Now that the wall was gone, the accessible area of the mysterious forest increased drastically. Likewise, the fog lifted too. He had initially planned to stay only for a bit and do some harvesting today, but it was starting to look like he wouldn't be going back for a while. Exploration now takes precedence. After the appearance of dungeons and hunters, something special was established to connect all the hunters in the world. A community for hunters, by hunters, formerly known as the Hunter Net. Right now, the discussions on the Hunter Net were centered around one person and one video clip. Hunter Rank 12, the fierce sword witch Xiao Hian. Someone in a dark office was currently browsing the Hunter Net for information. She had long, fiery red hair and a stalwart aura, but tonight she was on her anonymous account with a red avatar, arguing that there should be no dispute whatsoever regarding the sword witch soloing the manstalker. Another anonymous user using a blue avatar argued that there was a valid case to be made. It should be impossible for Hyan to do something as incredulous as solo killing a manstalker without help. That really ticked off Red. You could almost sense how heated she got just by the increase in her typing speed. Blue kept arguing about the number of people entering the dungeon. Red fired back, bringing up the fact that Hyan had been a solo player ever since Han Xing-yuku mysteriously disappeared. Red maintained a stoic expression, but she was clearly locked in. Blue replied that they honestly hoped the sword witch would just forget about that Xing-yuku guy, adding that she couldn't keep missing someone who disappeared forever. That really pushed the wrong buttons in Red's mind. This stranger she had been anonymously arguing with could only talk trash like this because it wasn't their burden to carry. Red tried to explain that Hyan's significant other disappeared in a dungeon, and she had every right to miss him for as much and as long as she wanted. Her calm demeanor was gone, now she was just outright pissed. Blue made it even worse by replying that it had been 3 years since the incident, as if grief had a cooldown timer. In those 3 years, all she had done was repeatedly enter one dungeon in hopes of finding him again. Red wanted to make her point clear, but even anonymous Blue began to realize that it wasn't a good idea to talk about a missing person like that, unless you're Xiao Hian herself. This stranger had crossed so many lines that Red just wanted to break something. Suddenly the dark room lit up with bright office lights. A deep voice asked Red if she was a zombie for getting into the habit of browsing the net in the dark, an activity bad for the eyes but even worse for the brain. The dignified man who just entered was known as Choi Chan, the top alchemist of the Eternal Flame Guild. Red insisted she could concentrate better in the dark, while stretching after spending an ungodly amount of time surfing the web. Choi Chan had returned to report something he had checked out in person. His assignment was the lowest-ranked hunter with no traits. You're the one who runs the hunter store. As expected, Chan didn't feel anything special from the guy. Red was ready to dismiss the matter, concluding that Yoa had nothing to do with Xiao Hian getting stronger at an unbelievable pace and degree. But Chan wasn't finished with the report yet. He had inspected the wares and noticed that the store was selling something special. something that involved solar apples. Even Red had a vague idea of what those delicious golden treasures were. They were items that drastically reduced aether usage, and even the Eternal Flame Guild's top alchemist had never seen one in person. The shocking part was, Yua had brewed a potion from such a valuable ingredient, and was selling those potions at a very cheap price. Chan concluded that there were two possible assumptions behind this bizarre situation. Ria doesn't know the real value of solar apples. 2. Chan didn't even have to say the second one. The second assumption made Red's clever smile appear. It might just be the right one. Could it be that the mysterious Yua is a person without an ounce of greed? Since she needed some fresh air anyway, Red decided to check the store out personally and see the shop owner herself. Choan insisted on calling the car, but she refused. She's not a CEO or anything that flashy. Having a car driving her around feels like too much. She might have a point. She's not exactly a CEO, but she's still in a similar position. Red is Chakwa Yun, the Eternal Flame Guild Master. Back in the mysterious forest, Yua had made himself comfortable in the middle of all the greenery by making a small bonfire. The deeper he pushed into the forest, the colder it had gotten. It was a good thing he brought his light. The wall and fog that had blocked the inner forest had dissipated, opening up new possibilities. He looked around, but there wasn't much of a big difference from the first area he came from. Of course, he hadn't yet explored the perimeter fully. He was blocked from proceeding further by an ominous aura coming from a certain spot deeper in the forest. That place just seemed too dangerous. He could feel his fight or flight response getting triggered near it. Yua didn't want to put himself in danger just for the sake of curiosity, so heading back seemed like the reasonable choice for now. Just as he was about to get up and leave, his legion of adorable Tertera drones started meekly approaching him. All of them had worried looks on their faces, and were each carrying a mysterious plant seed. These Tertera drones had been carrying mist-chasing flower seeds all over the place to help get rid of the fog. Apart from the ones he saw during the Devil Ant War, Yua noticed a new face, a shy pterodon that was larger than the rest. He seemed a little different, so he might be their leader or representative. Now that he was seeing the bigger picture, it looked like these little guys had just come out of the ominous place at the heart of the forest. Suddenly, another system prompt popped up in front of Yua. This time it was a Terratra drone request, a mission to rescue their queen. These creatures apparently have queens, just like ants and bees. It seemed the mist-chasing flower seeds were an offering before asking for his help. Yua was moved by their current situation. Besides, these little guys had been protecting the forest thus far, so he promised to do what he could. He admitted he was a little scared, but he'd lend a helping hand. He patted the big pterodon on the head, assuring them that they would do the rescue operation tomorrow. For now, there were preparations to be made. The next day came, and Yua stood by his promise. He used the bountiful resources of the mysterious forest to brew another batch of healing potions, a batch of poison resistance potions, and prepared a healthy portion of combat rations. Yua poured all of these into their respective tiny bowls and let the Terra drones feast on them like a pre-game feast for war. Now that the basic preparations were done, adding an area buff like last time should make dealing with the devil ants easier. With his legion pumped up with feeds and brood boosters, their morale was sky high and their prowess even higher. When Yua ordered them to fly forth just like before, he remained in the back lines. As expected, the source of the ominous feeling deep in the forest was something the Tertera drones were very familiar with. It was a collection, a system of devil ant hives. The mother lode. This was the place where those pesky devil ants resided and prospered. For the first time in a while, there was something big enough to intimidate Yua. Each of these mountains of killer ants stood at least 3 meters tall. When the Tertera drones finally got close to the hives, they were greeted by the full force of the devil ant security team. These monsters immediately used one of their more lethal tricks, poison excretion, releasing toxins into the atmosphere. But with Yua's help and ample preparations, it looked like the little guys were up for the challenge. The war between the Pira drones and the devil ants had officially begun. With their stats bolstered to a new level, the beetle-like mythical beasts made quick work of the devil ants' first wave. It was a close fight overall, but the Terra drones were superior in sheer will. Thanks to Yua's preparations, his legion was clearly doing much better than they did last time. But not all of them could be outstanding fighters from the start. They were still in danger, especially on enemy turf. Yua was then notified that he could assist his legion with his power, but it would be limited to a one-time use. The next prompt offered an option. Put the winged devil ants back on the ground with a strong slap. It would cost him 3 essences, one-time help in the form of a slap. In a situation like this, it felt ridiculous. He didn't even know what he was supposed to do with such a silly choice. Then the solution to his problem presented itself. A winged devil ant emerged from their lair. These specialized members of the hive acted as messengers, capable of flight. The devil ant army was essentially trying to recall the main force back to the hive. Yua now had the chance to stop them with a single slap. He sighed, said whatever, and accepted the blessing from the system. As he clenched his palm, the winged devil ant began its urgent flight to call on the bulk of the army and end the war with the Pterodura drones. The drone, once and for all, felt so confident that the flight would go on without a hitch, that it forgot to check above for any anomalous figures looming around. Yua brought down his hand like the might of a giant god and slapped the clueless flying ant into smithereens. This was his one-time assistance to his Torterra drone legion, killing ants in classic style, a proper punishment for annoying pests. Taking a day out of her busy schedule, Hwa-yeon decided to visit Yuji's store. After inspecting the building that sold sun apples up and down, she didn't notice anything supernatural. Externally it was unremarkable and had nothing special, but you can't judge a book by its cover. No one knows what secrets might be stored inside. Hwa-yeon had said that she defeated a stalker after shopping here, so Hwa-yeon couldn't go by such vague information. Now she was even more eager to uncover the secrets of this place. She was in a great mood and had a huge pile of questions she wanted to ask the shopkeeper. But when she pulled the door handle, it was closed. After tugging a few more times, she made sure she wasn't imagining things and began looking around. It was odd that the sign was flipped to open, but maybe the owner had just stepped away for a while. She might need to wait a bit. But that bit could drag on for hours. Turning to the old man who had originally cleaned the site, she asked about the store's hours of operation. However, the man didn't know the exact time, even though it used to open on time and close late in the evening. Unfortunately, for the past few days, the potion store had changed its schedule. The owner had started opening the store less often. This time, the doors had remained closed since yesterday, and no one knew what the problem was. In the end, the old man muttered that young people were getting lazier every year, then turned his back and continued cleaning in the other direction. This information completely contradicted what Hwa-yeon had previously received. She had been told they only closed on weekends. A glance at the wooden signboard displaying a potion vial convinced her of her suspicion. Anyone hearing about the sudden change in opening hours would think of something fishy. As expected of Yuji, he was up to something. Meanwhile, our hero used the system's gifted opportunity to participate in the Torterra drone battles and resented how little he could do. However, it should have been enough to bring them closer to victory. This wasn't even his war after all. Besides, eliminating the messenger wasn't bad revenue either. Of course, the devil ants didn't like this turn of events, and their motivation was fading. Looking at the reinforced Torterra drones, it was immediately clear what the battle's outcome would be. Their armor had become stronger, and their strength had grown far beyond its original level. That's why when attacked, the ants fled, emptying the clearing. Sighing a breath of relief, Yua sat down on the ground and covered his eyes. This war was mentally exhausting for him. Meanwhile, the Torterra drones began running around him, happy that they had managed something incredible. However, their queen was still inside the anthill and she had to be rescued somehow. Remember, here comes the sun. Turning his head toward the anthill, he wondered what was going on. The Torterra drones had rescued her themselves. They had even managed to create a stretcher. Their development was clearly at a high level, even without evolution. Raising her head a little, the queen looked at her savior and began to express her gratitude. With the help of her subordinates, she managed to rise to her feet and bowed to Yua for rescuing her and supporting their settlement. He was naturally happy about it, but forcing a sick creature to bow wasn't his style, so he gently stroked her and told her that everything was fine and she could rest in peace. He was genuinely glad that she was unharmed. Looking at the situation from the outside, one might compare him to an angel descending from heaven. Nevertheless, the system window informed him that the Terra drone queen wished to swear allegiance to him. If he signed the contract, he would sponsor her group and receive several items, with the stipulation that Yua would have to fulfill their requests. Fortunately, he didn't have to think twice. He gladly accepted the queen's offer. After acknowledging the loyalty of the queen and her troops, the system notified him that he could now supply their squad directly. At that same moment, General Pterodon suddenly began to emit a bright light and absorb energy from the environment, changing form. He had managed to evolve thanks to the agreement he had signed. His appearance changed noticeably. Not only did his claws become larger and stronger, but his chitinous shell also reinforced the quality of his armor. Yua watched the transformation with a smile on his face, marveling at how powerful his ally had become. Now the Terradrone general began to live up to his name, standing out from the otherwise uniform surroundings of his fellow drones. After circling above Yua's head for a moment, he raised his large claw and signaled the rest of the group to get ready. At that moment they began carrying golden essence ingots and Itha stones, ignoring Yua's earlier insistence that he didn't need so much. Examining the two large piles of consumables, he decided to only take 10 pieces of each, and leave the rest to the Terra drones. Besides, he already had something very valuable. The general had brought it to him before the battle. He took out two. He pulled seeds of different colors from his pocket and examined them. The purple one was immediately recognizable. It was a wild grape, but the green one was more difficult to identify. He couldn't immediately figure out what kind of fruit tree seed it was, so he left it for later. After getting up from the ground and shaking off his clothes, the protagonist decided that he would find out what it was when it grew, and the forest would take care of the rest. Yua had begun to appear in this forest too often, so after looking around he decided it was time to build a hut. The very next day, a new gate to the dungeon opened, which the people did not miss out on. Seeing it, a group of hunters passed through the gate without delay. Looking for bait, one of them asked Hennim if he was sure the Queen of the Ants was here. Hennim wrinkled his nose a little and instead of yelling at the fool, calmed down and replied that he wasn't crazy enough to enter the dungeon of the devil ants. Besides, if they managed to loot the anthill properly, then everyone in the squad could earn a decent amount of money as a reward. However, his interlocutor immediately stopped in place and pointed forward, not understanding what was happening. It seemed to him that the dungeon had already been cleared, but Hennim dismissed it as nonsense. The gate had just opened. Once close enough to the anthill, even the omniscient squad leader was greatly surprised by what he saw. The anthill was indeed empty, which confused many people. Entering a new dungeon that no one had yet cleared usually meant facing a huge number of monsters and the potential for precious loot, but today's dungeon was fundamentally different. Someone assumed that it had been cleared in another area, but that turned out to be a foolish guess. Everyone knew that a past dungeon does not open twice. The commander himself couldn't believe it, but the nonsense turned out to be true. No one knew who had cleared the anthill, but looking at the traces left behind, it was obvious that someone had already fought them. To top it all off, the ants were nowhere to be seen. This put an end to any speculation. The commander ordered everyone to immediately shut up and look for tracks, refusing to believe they had all disappeared. At that moment, someone in the group looked down and cried out in surprise. Hennim leaned down, irritated, not understanding why he was yelling and scaring the others. As it turned out, the group of hunters had unknowingly been standing on a giant palm print, one big enough to fit 20 people. The entire group instantly gathered into a heap, trembling with fear. It was hard to believe that something huge existed in this dungeon, something capable of leaving such a massive footprint. There had been no reports of a monster like that. If it was a monster, it might be one of destruction rank, a creature clearly beyond the capabilities of the hunters who had entered. and not something matching the dungeon's supposed rank. Gnashing his teeth in fear, the commander realized they wouldn't be able to handle the monster that had destroyed the devil ants. If they let their guard down even for a moment, they might be killed before they could even react. Heeding his advice, the group decided to retreat and contact the association to report the footprint. There was no fool among them who wanted to stay there. Soon everyone left the dungeon. Having fulfilled their mission, they handed over all the information to the guild, with photos as proof. The head of the guild took the situation as an emergency and immediately began evaluating the handprint that had been sent. He was told that it was found near the Devil Anthill, but that wasn't the strangest part. The secretary added that the hunters had ended up in a scavenged dungeon, which was supposed to be impossible. After listening and reviewing the evidence, the heir to the Goro group, Kim Hong-suk, ordered that he be notified of any new developments related to the case. Reasoning over the print, he immediately realized that this wasn't the hand of an ordinary monster, but the print wasn't large enough to indicate a completely new species either. Perhaps this monster belonged to a mythical rank, a classification few people even knew about. But what if a creature above destruction rank had appeared? Strange things had been happening more and more frequently, and Kim Hong-suk was growing increasingly concerned about the fate of the country. Standing up from his chair, he walked over to the window and looked out at the city, remembering the horrors people had once experienced. He couldn't allow them to happen again. He decided to put all his efforts into this matter. Meanwhile, Yu was quietly trading in his store, unaware of what was going on in the mind of the guild leader, who also didn't know about the war between the pterodon and the devil ants. The weather was fine in Seoul that day, so Yuji closed the store for a while and went to Area 5. There, he stood quietly under a building with an intercom, waiting for the person he had previously arranged to meet. Fortunately, the wait wasn't long. After being called out, he immediately turned his head toward the source of the sound and smiled. Running in his direction was a beautiful girl, carrying a book under her arm. She greeted him and winked. She apologized for the delay and said he could have just gone inside and waited. However, that wasn't a problem for him. So our hero simply asked her not to run, worried that she might fall. As he expected, she immediately found herself on the ground. Consider him a prophet, but he just knew her too well. After all, this wasn't the first time she had fallen like this. Yuji approached her and asked about her condition, but she quickly said that the book was intact and there was nothing to worry about, then started to get up from her knees. However, that wasn't what he meant at all, but he didn't bother to correct her. That clumsy girl was Hwang Sang, the only huntress with origami skills in South Korea. Smiling awkwardly, she scratched the back of her head and began to justify her fall, saying that she hadn't exercised in a long time and had even forgotten how to walk. There were a lot of differences between her and Yuji, but the fact that Wang's son Sun Young turned out to be a bookworm united their interests. Holding out a green-wrapped box to her, he handed her breakfast from Jimmy, asking her to take care of it. Wang Sun-young was surprised that this was the only reason our hero had come to her, but upon catching a whiff of the food, she thanked him for his concern. As she took the box into her arms, she realized something was holding her back. Remembering the book, she held it out to Yuji. Last time she had gone to the store looking for a new story, but that day his manager had been rather sad. As it turned out, people were buying this book as a piece of decoration, then coming back and demanding a refund. It was quite beautiful and stylish, so even though it was useless, they still bought it as a gift. Wang Sun-young thought the book would go well with the main character's interior, so she gave it to Yuji. The fact that it was being returned seemed strange, but he still accepted the gift. Feeling some sort of power in his hands, he looked at it and was a bit surprised by what started to happen afterward. The object exuded a muted green color, so one could guess it wasn't just a piece of paper. A system notification announced that he had received an endless spellbook, but in order to write something in it he would need to use petrol quill and ink. Turning to Wang Sun-young, he decided to clarify whether this book was indeed just a common decoration, but the answer was what he expected. She also thought the rumors about it were strange, but there really wasn't anything written inside. Besides, she had also tried to leave her own notes there, but that idea had failed as well. The manager must have tried to test the power of the book, but when it didn't work, he decided to use it as a decoration. Yuji was stunned by what he heard. Why did the information window pop up for him then? Most likely the system simply didn't show her any data, which caused her to give it away without asking for anything in return. Our hero looked at her suspiciously, thinking about this, but she misunderstood and thought that he wasn't pleased with the gift. She was ready to take the book back. However, it turned out to be quite the opposite. After saying that he liked the book, Hwang Sun-young was very happy that she had managed to give him something worthwhile. Looking at such a valuable book, he promised that he would use it to the fullest. He didn't know anything about it, but no one forbade experimentation. After saying goodbye to Hwang Sun-young, our hero returned to his store, where he opened the book and tried writing in it. As he had been told earlier, it was not possible to leave notes, neither with a pen nor with pencils. The information mentioned that he would need a petrol quill and ink. Somehow he would have to find information about the petrel, but there was a small problem. The petrel is a bird that is rarely seen, usually in various desert areas, except in the oceans of the polar desert. In addition, it has a wingspan of approximately 25 meters. It was hard to imagine fighting against such an enormous bird. Looking at its size, Yuji immediately realized that killing it and taking a feather would not be an easy task. On top of that, it was rare, which meant it would take more than a day to hunt. Giving up without even trying, our hero still decided to make the book a decoration, just as the bookstore manager had suggested. However, as soon as he put his hand on the page, particles of magic and system windows appeared in the air, granting him the skills of good handwriting and ancient magic. Yuji couldn't believe that he had been given a new trait and didn't realize what the ability was for at first. Squeezing his palm, he tested the gifted power but felt nothing. However, the fact that he had managed to obtain it couldn't be a mere coincidence. Taking the pencil from the nightstand in his hand, he tried writing on the usual yellowed pages. This time, the protagonist succeeded. The few lines he wrote raised his good handwriting skill level to level 2. After receiving his new ability, Yuji tried out many things and learned a few facts. He still couldn't write in the spellbook, even after mastering such a useful trait. 2. His handwriting had now gained elegance, as if he had graduated from a calligraphy school. In a way, it was a useful trait. Before, he wrote like a chicken scratching with its paw. But now anyone could understand his words. As he looked at what he had written and thought about where he could apply it, his heart suddenly pounded loudly in his chest, making him nervous. This state lasted only a few seconds, but it made our hero extremely alert. He didn't understand what had happened, but Yuji quickly guessed what was about to occur. So he literally flew out the door of the store in a second. As expected, a portal opened up right next to his shop. It looked like it was alerting people. The parameters of the portal said that it was of 0 rank. It was for working-class people, and it would be open for only an hour. After reading this information, our hero could not believe his eyes. Encountering such a gate seemed like unprecedented luck. It was as if the portal was meant only for him, and it led directly to the petrol. Could it be because of the beautiful handwriting skill? Yuji had a black viscous aura that scared people, but if he was a rank 0, it might be alright. All one had to do was cross the threshold and find out. However, going there empty-handed was too reckless. Even though he was a rank 0, he was on a direct path to a huge bird. Therefore, after returning to his store, Yuji gathered the things he needed and entered another dimension. It was breathtakingly beautiful. Huge waterfalls surrounded by forests created a rainbow over the surface, mesmerizing in its brilliance. This location was perfect for the petrel's habitat. Just thinking about it, he heard the cry of a bird of prey behind him. As it approached, anyone with an instinct for self-preservation would have run and hidden in the bushes, but the protagonist stayed put, shackled by fear. Her eyes burned red, and her feathers developed a dark aura, intimidating her victim. Just as the information said, the storm petrel appeared to be of enormous size. Looking up, our hero could not believe that he had managed to see such a rare, massive bird in reality, one the size of a building. However, the question of how to catch it was still unanswered, which made him want to sob, feeling something soft touch his face. Yuji opened his eyes and looked at the blue feather slowly descending downward. As it turned out, the storm petrel had thrown off a dozen feathers and quietly flown back to its nest, leaving our hero alive. He was incredibly lucky, so he quickly began to collect the items into his backpack, not missing a single feather in sight. Now it was just a matter of finding ink. Luckily, he already had an idea where to get it. Without expending any effort, he paid a visit to the Pura drones, who were kind enough to share the green liquid they made from an extract of green herbs. Even Yuji was surprised at how quickly they had found it, but he was glad he had reached out to them. After inspecting the flask, he thanked them for their assistance and placed it in his pocket. All the necessary items had been found, so he could begin the experiment. All that remained was to unravel the mystery of the endless spellbook, which he had prudently brought with him. Crouching on the nearest rock, our hero dipped his quill into the calligraphy rod. He wondered what riddle the book held, and made a few strokes. Since no one had any idea what it could do, he had to solve its mystery himself. As soon as he touched the book with his quill, the letters literally turned into yellow symbols that swirled around him. After flying for a bit, they settled on one of the nearby trees where they recreated the full text of the message. As it turned out, they were runes that shimmered with golden light, surprising Yuji in the process. In an old book he had read about a great tree that taught people 4 spells: creation, harmony, change, and destruction. But this power was hard to control, so runes were developed. The world tree gave them knowledge, but ancient magic was difficult to manage, so they created runic words to apply magic. However, our hero had never heard of anyone actually using runes. It seemed he had managed to discover something new, a knowledge previously unknown to him. What he saw in the forest turned out to be exactly that, an elaborate cipher. As one could guess, they appear if certain conditions are met. But why were they engraved on the tree and not in the spellbook? Come to think of it, this was the exact tree Yuji had revived when he first came to the forest. It was hard to believe that such a small, almost withered sprout was a world tree. However, that wasn't what mattered right now. It was unclear whether the runes would disappear in the future, so the protagonist decided to write them in the book. It was the first time he had seen these inscriptions, but somehow it seemed as if he knew the meaning of each of them. Destruction, the fire that will set everything ablaze, read the inscription on the tree trunk. Copying each rune into the spellbook, our hero noted that the spell contained some very harsh phrases. At that moment, the system notified him that the scroll of change had gained the power of destruction, which increased the destructive power of rune magic. The book itself filled with fire that did not burn and transformed the written lines into a scroll. Yuji did not want to do that, as the book would quickly thin and become useless. However, there was no choice, the theory had to be tested. Rolling it up and tying it with a red ribbon created a spell scroll that was quite convenient to use. Such a product would sell well in his store, so the protagonist decided to write another 99 scrolls while there was still time. He was about to reach for the book to continue his work, but it began to exude power. The torn-off sheet reappeared in the book as if nothing had ever been removed. This could only mean one thing: the spell book was truly endless. With such a marvelous item, one would never have to worry about money again. Yuji even had plenty of ink, so he could make as many scrolls as he wanted. The only problem was that he didn't know what their properties were. It was only stated that they increased the destructive power of rune magic. Since our hero was not a mage, there was no way to test it unless he gave it to a magician and learned from their feedback. Just that day, such a person came to his store. Right after Yuji returned home, standing before him was Chapwayan herself, in full uniform and holding a staff with a scarlet crystal behind her. Seeing our hero at the table, she quickly stepped toward him, not hiding the anger on her face. She hit the table hard with her hand, and the entire store groaned at the sound of her blow. Turning to him, she irritably remarked that Yuji was hard to track down. He had no idea how many times she had come to see him, but he knew one thing for sure: she was just like Hajin in Sasai. Apologizing for his absence, the protagonist explained that the store had been closed for personal reasons. It didn't open as often as it used to. After evaluating his appearance, she agreed with Chilhen's words that Yua was an unremarkable person. While she was assessing him, the man shivered in sweat from her fearful gaze, pondering what he had managed to do wrong. It wasn't a problem for Chakwayan that he was useless after all. She hadn't come for him at all. Looking around the shelves behind our hero, she examined the quality of his potions that made Hyujin stronger. After coughing a bit, she apologized for her behavior and said that she should have considered the fact that he might have his reasons. After that, she pulled out her wallet, from which she took her business card. Changing her expression to a more welcoming one, she handed him the card, which had a red image of a coat of arms on it, and introduced herself as the head of the Eternal Flame Guild. After explaining that she had received information that he possessed unique items, she told him she had come to verify the rumors in person. Yuji immediately realized it must be about the sun apple, which made their negotiations much easier. After all, he was not only selling the apple but also the winter strawberry potion, which simplified battles in many dungeons. Right now they were in high demand and selling like hotcakes, so it was no surprise that she had come to him. After asking for a few minutes, he started looking for items on the shelves. As Cha Huayun had mentioned earlier, she'd had a few bad experiences coming to him, so he wanted to offer something on the house. This surprised her. It was wild, considering they weren't in a market and were talking about rather expensive products. However, she didn't have to turn them down either. Turning toward her, our hero turned pale and didn't know what to say. Due to some circumstances, he had run out of all the potions, which he regretted greatly. Yua had gotten too engrossed and neglected his work because of the incident with the Tirad drones and the endless spellbook. Even he had begun to doubt whether he was really a shopkeeper. After all, he had never run out of anything before. A little upset, the protagonist asked Cha Huayun to come back tomorrow when they were ready. From the situation, she was missing all the words she originally wanted to say. It took her a long time to decide whether he was kind or just stupid, but that wouldn't make the goods appear. Since they were out, nothing could be done. Turning toward the door, she frustratedly dragged her feet toward the exit. She had wanted badly to use the items in the dungeon she was heading to today, but she'd now have to come back tomorrow. Luckily, remembering the scrolls he had made, he stopped her and asked about her skill. By the looks of it, it was clear she was skilled in fire magic, but he still decided to ask, and his guesses were confirmed. Holding out his own handmade spell, Yuji asked her to use it as compensation for her time. Cha Huayun was greatly surprised when he handed her a plain scroll, but the protagonist explained that he had only made it yesterday as a test sample. He was sorry to let her go empty-handed, so he decided to give it to the mage. Since she was so kindly offered an alternative, there was no reason to refuse. Opening the paper, it lit up with a bright flame, similar to her hair. After reading the words on the scroll, "Your fire will set everything on fire," Cha Huayun began to play with the flames. Luckily, she liked both the phrase and the gift she had received so unexpectedly. After saying goodbye to each other, she closed the doors and headed toward her team. However, as she was leaving, Yuji noticed that her staff had changed slightly. The sickle-shaped end with a core inside began to brightly emit an orange light. Had it shone like this originally? Meanwhile, Cha Huayun met up with her team and entered the Spider Girl dungeon. The guardian monster was destroyed rather quickly, but the squad leader told them not to relax and to stick to formation, occasionally looking around. As expected, fire magic worked perfectly against the insects, turning them into ash. As she continued to run forward, she tried to keep up the group's enthusiasm, praising them little by little. If they kept working like this, getting to the center would be easy enough. All the while, as she fought the monsters, she noticed that her strength was greater than usual. She didn't understand what was happening, but she could clearly see the runestone raging. Cha Huayun stayed on her guard the entire time, but as soon as she let her thoughts wander for a second, she found herself under attack. Luckily, she was warned in time, which allowed her to jump aside and avoid the viscous liquid the spider girls were spitting. The man who had warned her was excited about the incident and quickly asked how she was, but all seemed fine. There was one threat, however, that could have caused their operation to fail. As it turned out, there were far more monsters than the report had indicated. The man explained that there were a lot of changing factors in this dungeon, so it was not always possible to accurately determine its condition. But what to do next, retreat or regroup? After thinking about it for a bit, Cha Huayun ordered them to forget about it and continue the offensive. Of course, everyone was worried about the condition of the guild manager's head and didn't want her to overdo it, but this time was very different. They didn't have to worry about her today. Thanks to the scroll, her strength had increased several times, and she was now capable of doing anything. Raising her staff into the air, she spoke the words of the scroll, then the runes began to flow together, creating a powerful attack that no one had ever seen from her before. Huayun ordered everyone to immediately fall back if they didn't want to be hit. Pointing her weapon in front of her, she directed the magic surged forward, whereupon a huge stream of flames began to incinerate every living thing that came under its influence. Every spider girl that was exposed to the fire began squirming in agony as it ate through the entire forest. It was over very quickly, after which a squad of hunters began to cheer for Huayun. No one knew how much she had raised her skill level, but they were sure that, at this rate, they would succeed in destroying everyone. To some extent, even she herself could not believe her power and stood still for a while looking at the scepter. She had an idea as to why this was happening, but it was a bit hard to believe. Could a scroll created by an ordinary worker really be capable of such a thing? As Yuji had promised, the next day he prepared a case of the required potions, spending the entire night making them. Looking at his labor, he estimated the size of the order, trying to determine the right amount, just in case. He made both sun apple potions and winter strawberry potions. When placed side by side, it felt as if day and night were facing each other with their yellow and blue colors. Leaving the box on the table, our hero looked at the wall where a clock hung. It showed 7:30. The only thing left to do was pack the goods before Huayun arrived, as she had said she would come early in the morning. So he hurried. After a while, the bell hanging on the door rang loudly, announcing a visitor. As it turned out, it was Huayun, to whom he happily informed that he had just prepared the potions she had requested yesterday. This time, however, she didn't come alone. Behind her stood a man in a business suit, presumably a member of her guild. Huayun had thought it appropriate to discuss the elixir later, but now she wanted to talk about a more delicate topic. There was no point in refusing her, but deep in his heart, Yuji harbored some worry about the scroll he had given away yesterday. Fortunately, his fear was not justified. Now in front of his face lay a large briefcase filled with a huge pile of money. Yuji didn't understand what was going on, so he sat on the chair in deep shock, asking what it was. The guild leader calmly replied that it was money. Looking at his reaction, she even assumed that he was the type of person obsessed with money or maybe not interested in it at all. Of course, that didn't explain why he was selling potions at such a low price. However, all of this wasn't really about our hero. Feeling nervous about the implication, he replied that everyone likes money. He was just a little surprised when such a large sum was placed on the table. After that, an awkward silence hung in the room. In the quiet, Huayun's voice was enchantingly soft, making it a pleasure to listen to. She began to talk about the scroll that had unexpectedly fallen into her hands. Its effects were unimaginable, and it was of A-class or even S-class quality. She was grateful to have received it for free, but she couldn't just let it go. The protagonist completely understood her feelings. As expected, the endless spell book had made for excellent spells. As she continued the dialogue, she emphasized that if he was uncomfortable receiving such an amount in cash, he could easily have it transferred to his account, whatever suited him. However, what Yuji said next shocked her. After expressing his gratitude, he flatly refused to accept the money. As stated earlier, he had given the scroll as an apology for the long wait. He considered himself an ordinary person and couldn't accept her money. Still, whatever the outcome, she had received the scroll as an experimental item. Huayun couldn't leave the situation unresolved. She remarked that it only takes a few seconds to turn a good person into a stupid one. The secretary, who had been standing next to her the whole time, wanted to stop her, but she continued her speech. Take for example the goose that lays the golden eggs. What would happen if people got it for nothing? Yuji, thinking it was just a reference, briefly replied that everyone would be rich, but the answer was fundamentally wrong. Everyone would immediately know about it, and many would even try to capture the goose, wanting to single-handedly own its riches. Of course, the fact that the protagonist was on the side of the hunters was good news in itself, but at the same time it was no less dangerous. That was why she wanted to make him a rather pleasant and favorable offer. Her eyes instantly shone with fire as she offered him a place in the Eternal Flame Guild. It was quite an unexpected offer that needed proper thought. Chaedwayon had said some harsh things earlier, but that was because she was worried about him. At the same time, she sincerely wanted to attract him to her guild. There would be many people in this world who wanted to deceive him for their own gain, but she wanted to prevent that. Besides, they had brought him a large amount of money to prove that they could properly reward Yuji's abilities. Eternal Flame was a guild known for its benefits. Yuji replied that they didn't need to go that far to convince him. However, she still wanted to show that such a famous guild would take good care of him. To top it all off, they had many mages but also skilled alchemists. After patting the secretary on the shoulder, she introduced Kohan-si as their chief alchemists, the one supplying them with potions. Besides him, there were other skillful alchemists in the guild, and even they were given plenty of opportunities for experimentation. There were no restrictions on research. As such, if Yuji agreed to join them, the guild would try to match his desired salary. Moreover, Chaedwayon would agree to let him hold the position of chief, or even higher. She did her best to attract him, but our hero only thanked her. Her sparkling words touched him, and he agreed to accept only them as a sign of goodwill. Chaedwayon quickly commanded Chul-Han-si to get the contract out as fast as possible to sign the agreement, but he froze, for he was the first to realize what Yuji had actually said. Literally a second later, she too realized what they had been told, and she was in deep shock at the rejection. She couldn't understand why he didn't agree to what was offered, so she was willing to raise the stakes and make the terms more generous. But for him, everything initially felt too overwhelming. He believed there were more talented people who would be perfect for the position, so he was willing to sacrifice such an expensive opportunity. After saying those words, she was literally boiling with anger and was ready to pounce on him, having spent days pounding into him that he was worthy of the position. The patient Chul-Han-si was the only one holding her back, trying to resolve the situation. However, Chaedwayon was not going to stop. She shouted at the top of her voice, asking Yuji to stop humiliating her. She only managed to keep quiet and calm down when he began to speak, but it was not a pleasant story. He was originally a low-ranked hunter and had no powers whatsoever. He was able to create those potions not because of any special skills, but only because he had been lucky enough to find good friends. He was sure that one day his abilities might disappear, so he wasn't confident that he could continue doing great things for long. In addition, Yuji had become very attached to his little store. Of course, Chaedwayon didn't want to miss out on such a potential hunter, but the judicious Chul-Han-si stopped her. Still, it would be quite difficult for them to change Yuji's mind, so he offered to stop there and show respect for Yuji's wishes. The protagonist was glad when they backed off, but to keep morale high, he replied that he wouldn't forget their advice for the rest of his life and would be extremely careful. That was why he promised to raise the price of the potion she had asked for yesterday. Now they had to be careful with him. Watching this cute situation, Chaedwayon simply laughed. Anyone in the store would have thought she was pushing him to do something bad. However, even though she was still a bit upset by the rejection, there was nothing she could do about it. Later, she warned him not to be afraid to ask for help if he ever found himself in a dangerous situation. Smiling at her warning, Yuji asked her not to worry. If something like that happened, he had something that would warn him. Yuji then pointed to a plant that literally looked like a bell. In addition, it had a similar name, the buzzing bell, which made a sound if a worker was in danger. Since the gate had appeared, the protagonist could no longer spend time in nature. Monsters had managed to take over not only the beach and the sea but even the mountains and valleys. They had adapted so well that it was quite difficult to find a place free of them. Only thanks to the Forest of Dreams was he able to avoid encountering horrible creatures, sometimes finding moral peace there. Even now, strolling along the sandy beach, Yuji finally had the opportunity to sincerely enjoy nature. The waves were humming and crashing against the sand relentlessly, creating soothing sounds. Only the subtle fragrance of the sea, like silk, touched the tip of his nose, making him sneeze. At first, the view was indeed beautiful, but it was a bit hot as expected. The sea was the best for relieving headaches. Originally, the protagonist thought there would only be a forest here, but after walking not too far, even the sea had appeared. Now this place looked more like paradise than land. Today he had wanted to do some shopping, but after Shakwayun came in, he got a bad headache that prevented him from working. After that, he felt like he had been robbed of the right to be the owner of his own store, even for a little while, and went into the forest. However, whatever it was, today he wanted to focus on regaining his strength by sunbathing on the beach. Happy for the sudden rest, he promised himself that he would only eat and read. Working with people took too much energy, so exhausted from dealing with customers, he spent the day in the silence of the forest of dreams. In the evening, he made a fire and sat comfortably, surrounded by his favorite books, enjoying the last hours of his stay. But there was one minor detail he had completely forgotten about. As if cursed all his life, someone was always following him. No matter where Yuji went, he was never able to be truly alone. Even now, while doing his business, a small snow-white cat with gray spots looking a bit like a snow leopard cub suddenly came to him. After watching the beautiful sunset shimmer on the waves of the raging sea, darkness fell. Being a thoughtful person, Yuji had built a small fire beforehand. Its warm orange light illuminated the stone cave, creating the perfect light for reading books. It was extremely peaceful in this small shelter. The quiet crackling of the wood and the chirping of crickets created a cozy atmosphere to fully experience the story being read. Once upon a time, no one had a problem listening to the sounds of the sea, but now it was occupied by monsters. Therefore, our hero was extremely lucky to enjoy the sound of the waves. If only he had the chance to bring Sanyo Hien or Sanuna here, he would do so without delay. Thoughts of his friends were like a warm blanket, comforting his mind and distracting him from the struggles of daily life. However, the memories of them faded away when strange sounds began to echo from the other end of the cave. After listening carefully, Yuji realized they sounded like a cat meowing. But what was it doing here? Taking a small log from the fire, he made a torch that lit the way well enough, getting closer and closer to the source of the sound. The protagonist realized that the meow was different from the usual voice of a cat. Could it be a lion or a tiger? Coming out of the other end of the cave, he leaned toward the humming bell that grew quietly in this forest. The plant was quite silent and did not make a single sound, which meant that the beast roaming nearby was not dangerous. However, the pterodon suddenly flying over his head still startled Yuji, and he rushed into the thick of the forest. As he ran after the pterodon, he began to hear the sounds of the animal's cries more and more clearly. As expected, the pterodon led him straight to a white cat with black flecks in its fur. The system quickly identified the animal as Actus, but it was obvious from looking at it that it was larger than a normal cat. It was not in the best shape, lying on the ground, shivering and moaning helplessly. Yuji took him into his arms, thinking he could help him by giving him a potion. At the same moment, the pterodon began to poke our hero with its claw, trying to draw his attention. Turning around at its call, Yuji started to apologize for being distracted and forgetting about him, but what he saw next touched his soul. Several pterodons had brought him fish. They had caught unbeknownst to him and were dragging them with their own 2 feet from the sea itself. Our hero was amazed at their care for the cat, so he praised them for their hard work in helping the forest dweller. Pride overflowed his heart. As a thank you, he scratched one of the creatures on the head and promised to bring more delicious food next time. Just like that, the cat found himself in Yuji's arms, with a delicious meal and a vial of the promised potion. After eating heartily, the protagonist was able to breathe a sigh of relief. It wasn't clear how the animal would respond to the potion, but it was worth a try. Not long ago, Actus had been shivering like an autumn leaf in the wind, but judging by how soundly he was sleeping now, it seemed that everything was fine. However, a funny thought struck Yuji at one point. Although he had not yet had the opportunity to fully explore the forest of dreams, this was the first time he had met an animal here. Stroking the soft fur of the cat, he became increasingly curious about where this little friend had come from. But at that very moment when his hand reached Actus's head, the cat suddenly opened his blue eyes and stared at him. Of course, our hero had not meant to wake him up. He was only stroking his fur out of habit. Thinking the animal might get angry, he instantly removed his hand and began to apologize. But as it turned out, Actus had woken up for a completely different reason, surprising Yuji in the process. Like a little kitten, the beast began to purr and paw at his hand, twisting his flexible body in different directions. He immediately began to be stroked and cuddled even more, with this behavior suggesting that he had chosen the protagonist as his companion. After calming down a bit, Yuji began to ponder over the animal's name. Although even the name sounded acceptable, it was just the species designation. Deciding that the animal's coloring was similar to that of a white tiger, he decided to name him Bam. Looking at Actus, our hero offered him to stay with him, of course, on the condition that he had nowhere else to go. After that, the beast meowed softly, and this sound was taken as agreement. After sitting in the forest of dreams for a few more hours, Yuji slowly packed his things and began to return home. There he set up a separate corner for sleeping and eating, and carried Bam himself to the store. There too, the poor beast could not stay quiet for a moment. Most of the women, as soon as they saw him, would squeal at the cuteness of the store's new resident. Lying in Yuji's arms, he seemed like an artificial doll with his eyes glistening from the light of the lamps. At some point, more and more people came wanting to see Bam, which brought the store a huge income. Many people assumed that he belonged to the snow leopard family, but that was fundamentally wrong. Our hero had found him in the dungeon and taken him in because he had nowhere else to go. Looking at the yawning animal, a wave of delight spread throughout the building, and then he was finally introduced as Bam. One of the customers naturally wanted to pet the cat's shining fur, so she thoughtfully asked for permission. However, Bam himself was against touching other people's dirty hands. As soon as the stranger's palm approached him, he immediately struck it with his claws. Yuji became very nervous when the customer's hand turned red from the scratch, causing him to ask how her hand was. Luckily, she was fine, unlike her broken heart. Naturally, the protagonist tried his best to smooth things over and apologized for the little incident, explaining that Bam was just shy. Stroking the animal on the head, he asked him not to lash out at people anymore. Meanwhile, in his head, Yuji replayed Bam's behavior. As it turned out, Bam was kind only to him. To everyone else, he acted coldly. If he continued to treat people like that, keeping him in the store would not be a good idea. However, even so, he couldn't leave him at home so easily. Besides, Yuji still wanted to show off the cuteness of his new friend. After this incident, most of the customers took their orders and left. Instead, Ko-Ah-Hyun came to him, holding a coffee stand in her hand. She had business to attend to, so she stopped by the store, grabbing some coffee on the way, assuming he liked it. After a brief greeting, she noticed the quiet sound of a cat that had folded its paws under itself and was sitting on the counter. She instantly grabbed a coat rack standing in the corner and began to cover herself with it, asking what kind of animal was sitting next to him. The protagonist calmly called its name and introduced it as a small tiger, while she trembled behind the wooden stand, moving further away toward the exit. As it turned out, she was scared shitless of cats. Mustering up her courage, Hide-and-Seek carefully walked over to the counter and handed the coffee to Yuji, who hadn't even hoped for this little gift. However, in the very next second, she jumped back, asking the animal that had gotten up from its seat to stay away from her. But there was nowhere to go. Bam was now living with him, and she would be coming to the potion shop every day. No one had any idea that she was afraid of the cat, which caused Yuji to ask the dwarf cat to come down to the floor instead. Bam, however, sat back down in his seat, starting to purr so loudly that he could be heard in the other room. As it turned out, the little one wanted Ko-Oh-Hyun to pet him, but this behavior of his was particularly strange. Previously, he had been unwilling to let other people's hands touch his fur, but now he was willing to voluntarily rush toward her. Hearing this, she walked over to the counter and, gingerly reaching out, brought her palm closer and closer, until she touched Bam. His fur was very soft, and the vibrating sound of his purring made it feel like a light massage on her fingertips. Still, this tiger was one of the gentlest animals Hide-and-Seek had ever met. The name Tiger was the only thing fierce about him. In truth, he turned out to be an even affectionate beast. Playing with the cat had knocked out all the thoughts with which she had come to the store. And for a moment she forgot the reason for her visit. She had actually come to warn Yuji that Hardnet was getting more and more violent because it was giving away free reinforcement scrolls. However, this was no longer news. Shrugging his shoulders, Yuji replied that even so, the leader of Eternal Flame had already come yesterday. He had given Chaohuayan a scroll that was worth at least a few million, suggesting that he was either not an ambitious person or simply a fool. However, Ko Hien was sure he was just the kind of person who didn't calculate everything and wasn't greedy, an ordinary salesman who did good to the people around him. Perhaps that's what attracts people to him, and that's the reason why she had started coming to his store so often even just to watch. He begged Bam to stop chewing and stretching his shirt and told her that he had no evil intentions, except that this idle chatter was interrupted by the fiercely loud ringing of a humming bell that grew behind the counter of the store. Such trembling of the plant could only mean one thing. It was here as a warning of danger that could threaten his life. After that, all the loudspeakers began to announce the occurrence of a Type 4 disaster, asking all residents living nearby to urgently evacuate the area. Unfortunately, this was not a drill. Hidensi shouted for Yuji to leave the store immediately. In the haste and utter confusion, our hero had to leave the building, running away with his so-called kitty in his arms. The hunters had arrived, and the armed forces were coordinating with them to lead the people and guide them to the evacuation sites. Young, old, men, women, and children. Anyone who could be affected by the upcoming disaster was being quickly transported to a safer place. That included Yuji and Little Bam. If it's a Type 4 warning, they must be facing the catastrophe of a Category 4 dungeon. If that's the case, there will be quite a lot of strong hunters in the area. Yuji could only hope that they would be enough to stop the incoming danger. Bam sensed that something was wrong and was feeling anxious in the middle of the crowded evacuation area. While Yuji tried to comfort the little guy as much as he could, everything was going smoothly until the ground started shaking wildly. Everyone in the designated area felt the quake, and chaos and fear immediately took hold of the crowd. When the shaking subsided, Yuji asked himself if it was still too early to feel reassured. Bam was visibly upset by all the strange things happening, and the little feline's teary eyes were far too cute to ignore. Yuji was moving like a real cat dad, trying his best to comfort his little friend. He continued to reassure himself that the ground shake was probably nothing and that they would be fine. In this world, a catastrophe is not your run-of-the-mill disaster. It occurs when a crisis arises, and hunters entering a dungeon fail to complete their quest. There won't be any major problems with catastrophes from low-difficulty dungeons. Those are easy to contain and deal with. But there are rare cases like this one that go down a lot differently. It happens when a rank 4 or higher dungeon suffers a catastrophe. In the event of such a failure, all civilians within a 20-kilometer radius of the gate are evacuated. Every armed force that can spare manpower carries out military operations while deploying their finest armored units, and of course high-ranking hunters are mobilized, as they are the most well-informed and well-equipped when it comes to matters concerning dungeons. The Sword Witch, Ao Hien, and everyone else are on standby, as everyone simultaneously feels the descent of ungodly forces. The dungeon gate, which looks like a dimensional rift, slowly starts cracking and growing more unstable by the second. Finally, the first wave of monsters breaks free to wreak havoc and spread destruction. The catastrophe has broken through into the human world. This time, it seems the enemies are skeleton warriors brought back from the dead. Humanity's first line of defense opens fire with heavy artillery from the military forces. Every soldier who can hold a gun, it's automatic, semi-automatic, anything that fires and fires a lot, rains down lead on the monsters trying to encroach on the human world. Next come the targeted airstrikes being dropped from up in the sky. Fighter jets and their highly trained pilots rain down explosives to pinpoint and wipe out the incoming horde of skeletons in an open area. These skeleton monsters are also known as leeches. If these are the type of monsters that triggered the catastrophe, then the undead dungeon attack must have failed. Goro Group's successor, Kim Hung-suk, remains confident that even against these liches, their firepower would be enough to end it soon. He is already thinking of how to get away right after finishing off the remnants. He turns to one of the commanding military officers and suggests a focused fire on the gate itself. The hunters will deal with the monsters that slip through the cracks and the curse-using liches. Kim Hung-suk is quite certain that this operation is a lock for success, but that would only be the case if there's no other variable in the mix. Looking at the gate and the gigantic, grotesque creature emerging from it with its red eyes and disgusting mouth, it is starting to look like the worst is yet to come. Hung Suk identifies the creature coming out of the gate as a monstrous being. He immediately alerts all forces to raise the urgency and focus their entire firepower on the bastard that has just emerged from the fractured dungeon gate. Next comes the green light for open fire, an all-out attack that will pour out everything human technology is capable of, given the circumstance. A hellfire of explosives coming from both the skies and the ground rains down on the monstrous being, but it's looking like it is not faltering in its advance at all. It even taunts the military forces by catching one of the missiles right out of the air and putting the damn thing in its mouth. The booming sound and scorched earth explosion that result from the combined assault of everything the military has are destructive to the highest degree. The foot soldiers see this and start celebrating their supposed successful defense against the monstrous being. It looks like their focused firepower was quite effective at first glance. But Kim Hung-sik knows better. A monstrous being is a disaster-ranked creature. This much attack, no matter how impressive or destructive, isn't even enough to leave a scratch on it. As the smoke, dust, and debris settle, what emerges is the unscathed, hideous giant, with a permanent mocking smile on its ugly face. It is capable of almost human thought, and in its demented head it just keeps repeating, "There are enemies, dangerous enemies, and when there are dangerous enemies, it must kill." The monstrous being literally tanks every explosive and high-caliber bullet thrown at it. And now it is ready to take the initiative for its own attack. Kim Hung-suk notices that the monster is angling their way, and orders the armed forces to dodge the incoming charge. Everyone has not gotten out of the way yet, but it seems like that won't be a problem. The massive undead monster just passes them by without attacking at all. That bastard's goal is not the attacking military units on the front lines. It's so much worse than that. It's the spherical evacuation center at the heart of the city. The monstrous being is blowing past every single enemy in sight and is only focused on the area where most of the people in the city have gathered. In this fast-paced battle, the high-ranking hunters have not yet gotten the chance to show what they're capable of. They refuse to let this ugly bastard rush into the evacuation shelter without a fight. The attacking effort is being led by the Sword Witch herself. She comes from a high angle, with her magical blades lined up for a sharp attack. She then executes her special move, the technique that once ripped a man-stalker into shreds, her powerful rampage. The assault of the high-ranking hunters is not done yet. Eternal Flame Guild Master Chet Hyen also wants a piece of the kill. She orders everyone to stand back while she fires off one of her specialties. Using her runic wand enhanced by the scroll that Jia made, she fires off a scorching fireball that is more destructive than any man-made bomb. After that brutal assault of special moves, the monstrous being feels no pain at all. It still remains unscathed. As if to rub salt in the wounded egos of the guild leader and the Sword Witch, the monster doesn't even bother turning back to face them, as if they didn't even register on the creature's radar. At last, the monstrous being comes close enough to the evacuation shelter to lift its fist and gather whatever mysterious energy makes the undead so strong. In one punch, it tears a massive hole through the most secure and reinforced building in the city. This sphere was supposed to be a haven where people could expect to be safe from anything. The Sword Witch immediately rushes back into the action, even though Cher Hyen warned her that getting close to the monster would be dangerous. She just can't stand around and watch as people inside the shelter die. She is in there. The monstrous being rears its ugly mug and grotesque undead body in the hole it made, while the thought of finally finding the enemy continuously repeats inside its thick head. Who would have thought that the monster ignored all the attacks and all the forces outside to look for Yuji and Ben? Now that the shelter has been breached, it is safe to say that the situation outside is not looking good. Jia knows that the reasonable thing to do is to run away, but fear has trapped his legs in place. They won't move at all. He begs and begs for his trembling legs to move, to no avail. After a while, his lower body finally gains enough strength to take a step back, but it might just be too late.